Hello, I'm Jan Ashrawiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey. They have done business, they have voted together, and now they are planning how to invade together. China and Russia are deepening military cooperation with their eyes on Taiwan, and the rest of the world should probably start paying closer attention. On this episode, Russia and China are taking their military bromance to new heights, literally. As Russia's Prime Minister visits Xi Jinping, we ask ourselves, what is the state of Moscow-Beijing affairs today? So without further ado, let's take a look at our latest report to find out more.
The purpose of Russian Prime Minister Mikhail Mishustin's visit to China was more than to exchange pleasantries with Chinese dignitaries. Behind statements like these hide complex problems with which both countries have been grappling with for months.
We outlined new objectives for strengthening trade, economic, scientific and technological cooperation between our countries.
The key word is trade, in particular trade between Russia and China. Since the start of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Beijing has become Moscow's most important trade partner, who has had to step in to fill the holes left by departing Western companies. Yet in recent months, trade between China and Russia has slowed down, which spells serious trouble for the already struggling Russian economy. The leading reason behind this decline in trade are recent US sanctions that were imposed on Russian oil. This has led the Chinese side to slash imports of Russian crude, which means that one of the pillars of the Russian economy is left stranded. Moscow is reportedly seeking to remedy this drop in trade through more mutual investments and ambitious joint projects, which were to have been discussed during Mishustin's visit. Although both China and Russia used the visit as an opportunity to denounce sanctions not ratified through the United Nations Security Council, of which they are both permanent members, it is currently unclear what steps they will actually take now that the US has cracked down on the Russian export empire.
And now let's zone in on the explaining portion of our show. One of the most important moves that Russia has made in response to Western sanctions has been in the finance sector. Along with China, the two countries carry out 99% of their bilateral trade in their national currencies.
Ever since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Moscow has been pushing its allies to disconnect from Western payment systems in the wake of the financial sanctions imposed on it by Western nations. China has been very receptive to the idea, and for the last few years has been working very closely with Russia in the finance and banking sectors. For Beijing, this is a way to show its independence from what it sees as a crucial part of the US-led world order. Beijing has been supporting Russia by promoting the use of the yuan in its trade with Moscow. This transition to a separate payment system is almost complete on the trade settlement side, but there still lie challenges ahead, such as convertible currencies and high exchange rate risks. What's more, China is very cautious about exposing its financial system to potential secondary or fallout sanctions. Observers, meanwhile, point to this deepened partnership between Russia and China as part of a broader trend towards stepping away from the dollar as the dominant international currency. This also happens to be one of the most important tenets of Chinese and Russian policy within the BRICS format.
And now we're zooming in on Beijing and Moscow to explore the issue in greater detail. Reports from the Royal United Services Institute in London say that Beijing has contracted Moscow to equip and train an air battalion for potential operations targeting Taiwan. This isn't just another round of friendly joint drills or photo-op naval parades. For years, China and Russia have moved in sync, rhetorically, diplomatically and militarily. They call each other comprehensive strategic partners, and while that sounds like a bureaucratic marriage contract, it's becoming something much more consequential. The logic behind this new level of cooperation is simple yet dangerous. China wants Taiwan, Russia wants to keep NATO occupied, and both want to make the United States look overstretched. If the two coordinate effectively, a Taiwan crisis could force Washington to divert its focus and military resources to the Pacific precisely when Europe would need them most. On the Pacific, Moscow could apply pressure on Japan from the north through the Sea of Okhotsk and the Sea of Japan, while Beijing ramps up from the south and east, a classic two-front dilemma. For the Chinese army, air maneuver capabilities are the golden ticket. The idea is to parachute or fly troops directly into Taiwan and collapse resistance before it even fully mobilizes. On paper, it sounds like a sci-fi version of the Blitzkrieg. In practice, it is a logistical nightmare. Taiwan's terrain is mountainous, and its air defense network dense enough to make any airlifted invasion force wish it had stayed home. And make no mistake, the Kremlin is eager to share that playbook, because the more time Washington spends watching the skies over Taipei, the less time it has to focus on defending Ukraine or deterring Russian aggression in Europe. That is why this cooperation between Moscow and Beijing isn't a regional story, it's a global one. It reshapes the strategic calculus from the Baltic to the South China Sea. It signals a world where authoritarian powers coordinate across continents, sharing technology, doctrine, and intent. Now, does this mean we're looking at a formal alliance? Probably not, at least not yet. Beijing has no interest in being tied down by Moscow's European blunders, and Russia knows who the senior partner is in this relationship. But what we're witnessing is a new kind of alignment, a flexible, transactional, yet deeply strategic coordination of interests. They don't need a treaty, they already share something far more binding, a worldview. Both insist that borders and sovereignty are only sacred when they draw them, and both see chaos as an opportunity, because when Beijing starts thinking in Moscow's military terms and Moscow starts dreaming in Beijing's global ambitions, the rest of us are left watching two autocracies rehearse the future. And now here to shed more light on the issue is Jagannath Panda, Director at the Stockholm Center for South Asian and Indo-Pacific Affairs. Hello and welcome to Eastern Express.
Hi, thank you very much.
So when you look at the relationship between China and Russia, do you think the visit by Mr. Mishustin in China changes anything? Does it actually highlight any new developments, or is it really more of the same?
Well, I think there is a lot of diplomatic negotiation, exchange of visits at the high level. It's happening already between China and Russia for quite some time. So this particular visit, I don't think it's going to change much or make a difference, but this is definitely going to add to the substance of their negotiation, about their complementarity and about their relationship, which is gaining strength from time to time. But I think what this particular moment both China and Russia are trying to look from each other are to share as much as strategic compatibility is concerned, to maintain the momentum in their good relationship, which is emerging after the Ukraine war, and also trying to understand how the American president, Donald Trump, is going to address the whole issue, their relationship with Russia, their relationship with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and with the whole gamut of China-Russia complexity that is emerging with relation to the Ukraine war.
So now that you've mentioned Donald Trump, let's actually talk about that briefly. Which of these two issues do you think he handled better? The question of Russia and the war in Ukraine, or the recent meeting with Xi Jinping? Which of those two directions in U.S. foreign policy do you think is going in a more, positive, is developing in a more positive way, so to say?
I would say that if we see Trump's foreign policy after he has come back to power for the second term, his core approach has been to observe how China is approaching to the whole set of global politics, its relationship with the U.S., with relation to the to Russia-Ukraine war. So I think in that context, probably for Trump, his meeting with President Xi Jinping will matter more than the issue of Russia-Ukraine war. So, and as you could see during Trump and Xi Jinping's meeting, even though there has not really been any substantial outcome, but there has been a breakthrough meeting. It has been a breakthrough meeting in terms of marking a new signal to, it marks to a new beginning into their partnerships or into their relationships. So therefore, there is a lot of underground or a backdoor channel of communication is happening between Trump administration and Xi Jinping administration. So we should not really overlook to that. And therefore, I would say that for Trump administration, the relationship with China and Xi Jinping matters the most at this moment, because US-China rivalry is the top priority in American foreign policy any given day. So therefore, Russia-Ukraine war comes as a secondary issue.
Now, this, of course, is unfortunate from the standpoint of Ukraine, if the issue of the war is actually to be put on the back burner. But nevertheless, when looking at Russia right now, do you think that when comparing the relationships between the US and China and Russia and China, naturally, with the US and China, there is lots of contentious issues still. Looking at Russia and China, they often do declare that they are on the same page. But if China is actually faced with a choice, either have a great relationship with the US, or at least a developing one that includes many aspects, trade, transfer of technologies possibly, or at least the easing of restrictions on the said transfer of technologies, and of course, on the other hand, you have the relationship with Russia. Which would it choose, really? Would this sort of unlimited partnership that Putin was bragging about once after meeting with Xi Jinping, would that really matter? If you, on the other hand, if you have the potential of developing a stable relationship between the two biggest superpowers today, China and the United States, would Russia be simply left on, by the wayside?
Well, as far as Russia is concerned, I think Putin administration is watching it very closely, how the relationship between US and China is unfolding. And to Russia's discomfort, I think they would like to keep one way or the other their options, their strategic options quite open to talk to both the US and also a country like India, which is also a decisive player when it comes to US, China, Russia, and India complexity, strategic complexity in world politics. So therefore, Putin would be watching each and every developments concerning US-China relations. But I think what really matters here, I think we have to wait and see that how Trump is looking at China and vice versa, how Xi Jinping administration is looking at the Trump administration. I think at this moment between US and China, the two contentious issues are that how to tackle the trade-related issues, the tariff imposition, which is the Chinese are already facing the tariff imposition, and there are a couple of issues like the soybeans and the semiconductor. These are the contentious issues. So there will be a lot of backdoor negotiation about that. The second issue is how to really encourage China to come to a power to take the lead in global configuration. As you know, from day one onwards, President Donald Trump is talking about America first. And we all know that he would probably not really talk about America first if he really feels that America is really the number one power. And I think in American foreign policy strategic thinking, there is a realization, and of course in Trump administration, there is a realization that probably the Chinese are catching up, and America is not really the superpower what it used to be. So therefore, no matter how much Trump would like to talk about America first approach in its foreign policy, but ideally they would like to have a kind of negotiation and shared platform with the Chinese to share some of the responsibility globally. And that would allow actually the Trump administration to create a fissure, create a kind of division between Russia and China. So therefore, each of these moves and each of these complex issues between US, between China and Russia is going to matter to each other. And each of them, particularly Putin administration, is watching closely each and every development concerning US-China relations.
Now, Poland's foreign minister Radosław Sikorski recently said that Russia had a choice. It could become a partner to the West, but instead it chose to be a vassal to China. Do you think that this is the case? And also, do you think the US is actually worried about this? Because if the Russian economy is effectively swallowed up by China, that would mean a stronger China, and Russia that doesn't really have that much to say in this relationship. So would they actually still be trying to bolster Russia somehow in this relationship so that it actually maintains a strategic autonomy, as opposed to being so dependent on China, on its economy, that Moscow doesn't really have that much to say in the near future?
Well, I think if we try to think from Russia's point of view, Russia would try to have a good relations with the US from now on, since there is a lot of backdoor talk is going on between President Trump and President Putin. But at the same time, Russia would ensure that its relationship with China becomes deep and deeper. So therefore, that would really concern the American administration, particularly Trump administration. Trump administration is fine with a growing Russia-China relations, but Trump administration will be concerning if Putin administration and Russia is becoming more and more economically dependent on China. And I think that will be concerning, because once a country is economically dependent on another, then most of its political decisions, strategic decisions are influenced. So therefore, I think for the Trump administration, the concerning point would be how much Russia is going to be economically dependent in times to come on China. And the Chinese leadership, particularly Xi Jinping, knows that Russia is under pressure. It's fighting a war for last 4 years. Russian economy is not really doing well. Even though Russia has enough food reserves, Russia can really sustain its economy, but Russia is not really the same economy what it used to be 10 years back. So Russian economy will gradually be dependent on Chinese economy, and that would be a leveraging point as far as Xi Jinping administration is concerned. So therefore, a lot of concern for the Trump administration is how much Russia is going to be dependent on China in times to come. And more than that, I think the authoritarian nexus or the calculus that is emerging in the Eurasian region, particularly between Russia, China, North Korea, and also probably involving Iran. So that would really, on a real-time basis, will concern Trump administration, because Trump administration would not really like that Russia should be pushed closer to China and to the authoritarian nexus.
And of course, at the end of it is the scenario dreaded by the US administration, namely that Russia follows China's lead, and if China makes a move against Taiwan, Russia may try to distract NATO allies in Europe. Unfortunately, we're actually at the end of our conversation. Still, this is another topic that might be explored in the near future. For now, Jagannath Panda was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you absolutely don't want to miss. Russia's Security Council Secretary Sergei Shoigu has called for a push to create new industry in Siberia. The former defense minister pointed to Russia's Soviet and imperial past as an example of Siberia's resources being successfully exploited.
Siberia is widely seen as Russia's most powerful economic asset. This endless expanse of land, which comprises most of the Russian Federation, is home to a plethora of natural resources which the Russian economy is based on. Yet despite being proportionately devoid of people, the Russian state is now grappling with the issue of Siberia becoming even more depopulated. Since 1991, Siberia's already tiny population has dropped by 12%. To counter this problem, Moscow proposes to create economic and financial incentives in the form of ambitious industry projects that would encourage Russians to move to Siberia to work. These incentives include housing and car loans, which will be written off after 10 years of working in the region.
Authorities in St. Petersburg have selected a new enemy: street musicians. The police have carried out a crackdown against street performers, including confiscating instruments and even arrests.
According to St. Petersburg's Committee for Legal Affairs, the police raids were a part of so-called routine control measures aimed at, quote, identifying and stopping violations of the rules for organizing and holding street performances. Russian law requires prior authorization to hold street performances in crowded areas. During these raids, the police confiscated mainly guitars, amplifiers and other sound equipment. The latest crackdown comes amid a wave of police actions taken against musicians and supporters of Stop Time, whose members were arrested and given successive back-to-back jail sentences for performing songs by artists labeled foreign agents by Russian authorities. The arrest sparked a series of solidarity concerts and solo performances in several Russian cities, including St. Petersburg itself.
Vladimir Putin has turned out to be quite the fan of nepotism. He has elevated 24 relatives to official positions in what could be a centuries-long record.
The Russian government has often been accused of corruption and nepotism, but the scale is often far beyond what most people imagine. In the case of Vladimir Putin, according to independent Russian outlet Projekt, this may be a record-breaking case. Putin has introduced an entire network of relatives to official positions ranging from his own cabinet, such as the case of Energy Minister Sergei Tsvilov, who is the husband of the daughter of one of Putin's cousins, to powerful Russian state-owned companies like the gas giant Gazprom. The scale of the nepotism in Russia's upper circles is generational, as this marks the third generation of relatives that Putin has added to official positions. The Kremlin itself has not officially acknowledged these connections within Russia's government circles.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on DVP World for more latest news and updates.